Hey guys, Dre back at it once again for a brand new video for you, and this Dre Vlogs is an interesting one, as I think it's piped up again on social media and F1 on the internet in general over the last week or so. Now, as you know, Mercs had their fourth 1-2 finish of the season this weekend in Baku. No F1 team has ever won the first 4 rounds of the championship, first and second, and it's funny because after the race we had Toto Wolff come out and say, oh, Ferrari is still the benchmark and Ferrari is still the team to look up to, and they still are like pretending, or I say pretending, like they still seem to think that Ferrari's got a better car than they do, which is really weird because yet again Ferrari, like Mercs have now got something like an 80-point Constructors' Championship lead. And here we are now, where it's getting to the point where they're making defensive statements about themselves yet again. And a day later, Sebastian Vettel, who was taken out of context in an interview and then slapped all over the BBC F1 front page by Andrew Benson, said, oh yeah, well, you know, Mercs dominating is boring. Now, of course, this was like a red rag to a bull sort of headline here, because everyone on the internet jumped on it, you know. People were saying, oh, well, what about your level of dominance? Or people who had been defensive about it and defensive about Sebastian's fans in general pointed out the Lewis Hamilton quote, I think in The Guardian from 2013, when Sebastian, you know, was winning all these races, and then Lewis said, oh, Vettel could be killing the sport if he keeps this up. And I thought I'd make this video to sort of break it all down, talk about dominance in general, relatively speaking, and just the nature of why Mercs insist on being so defensive about this. I think the whole thing is just a bit weird in general, and I feel like it needs breaking down. Now, in modern day terms, Sebastian Vettel, I think, is used as the scapegoat for dominance in recent times. I think for a lot of people who are newer fans to the sport, he was the guy. He was, you know, that guy who stood out and shined as like the new star that came along and then won 4 straight titles, and he didn't have this reputation, or, you know, we weren't used to him being a top tier contender in Formula 1 when he did win that first championship. Under the radar, he was runner-up in 2009 and no one talked about it because of Jenson Button's dominance. But he wasn't a Fernando, he wasn't a Lewis Hamilton or a Jenson Button, he wasn't even a Felipe Massa or a Mark Webber. You know, this was Sebastian coming out of nowhere and stealing everyone's lunch money. Point is that he is not the dominant figure we all like to make out that he was. Yes, he won 4 consecutive championships, but I've said it before and I will say it again. I'd say maybe only a year and a half of it was that he was actually the top guy, or that he was in the best possible car and that, yeah, he was dominating the championship. It's easy to forget that the 2010 and 2012 seasons were 2 of the best recent on record. 2010 had 5 men eligible to win the championship going into its penultimate round in Korea that year, and even in the final round we had a 4-way title decider. Any one of 4 men could have left Abu Dhabi as world champion. I guarantee you we would have ripped our nuts off as fans if we had a 4-way title decider going into Abu Dhabi, now that F1's got a more prolific footprint on social media and has attracted more newer, younger fans in recent years. So 2010 was a very competitive season between the big 3, and then you can go one further. 2012 was arguably the most competitive F1 season on record. We had, in the first 7 races, we had 7 different winners in the first 7 rounds from 6 different teams. You know, we had Nico Rosberg won a Grand Prix, Pastor Maldonado won a Grand Prix, well, who else? You know, Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel, Fernando Alonso, and I want to say, who was the Lotus who won? I think it was Kimi Raikkonen who won a Grand Prix there as well. My memory is a bit rusty at the moment, so I'll put a text bar on the top if I get it wrong. Of course, Pastor Maldonado probably being the most shocking name of all of those. We almost had Sergio Perez win a couple of times over in that season as well. We had weekends where teams were up and down in terms of strength as the weekend went by. We had guys like Checo and Kobayashi on the podium on multiple occasions. Grosjean had come through as a decent talent, you know, and got over that whole crash fest reputation. This was one of the most competitive seasons ever, and it had a Vettel versus Alonso title fight finale, both of them chasing their third world championships. And I'd actually also argue that Lewis Hamilton probably should have been in amongst that fight as well if it wasn't for the fact that his McLaren let him down a couple of times in Abu Dhabi and in Singapore races. He was leading in Brazil as well, but then he was taken out by Nico Hülkenberg, who got a bit too overzealous on the brake pedal during that changeable conditions Brazil race. It wasn't pretty. And Hamilton had 75 points taken off him from race leading positions. Hamilton probably would have been in that title fight for the big two if it wasn't for that. I know it's a big, nice, tall glass of shoulda, woulda, coulda, but the point deserves to be made. So, the odd numbers years are the precarious ones. And even then, I think 2011 was the real year that I think that Vettel had the best car out of the box. 2013, it was a bit up in the air through the first half until Pirelli changed the compound of the tyres around and more teams started focusing on the new hybrids that was coming the following year, and Seb then won 9 in a row, which I think we underestimate just how impressive winning 9 in a row is. It was more than just Red Bull had the best car. Sebastian was fucking brilliant back then. Compare that to now, and to put it into perspective, just how dominant Mercedes are now. Well, I've only considered Ferrari a real threat, or Toto's maybe considered them a real threat since 2017, the last 2 seasons or so. In that time, Mercedes have won 28 out of the last 46 Grand Prix. That's 61%. 28 out of 46. And of those 46 Grand Prix, and of those 28 wins, 15 of them are 1-2 finishes. First and second in either order, between Hamilton and Bottas and vice versa. Since the hybrid era began in general, they've won, and I quote, 16 out of 19 in 14, 17 out of 19, and 19 out of 21, 12 out of 20, 11 out of 21, and then 4 out of 4 to start this year. That's 79 out of the 104 hybrid era races we've had so far. Over 70, something like 76% of the hybrid era races Mercedes has won. Yeah, they haven't got the sheer, like, ridiculous pace advantage of half a second a lap when they go to these Grand Prix these days. But they have tuned up the reliability, they are making less strategical goofs, you know, they are a more efficient, more well-run team than they were. Let's be honest, Valtteri Bottas is not the sometimes disruptive influence through no fault of his own that Nico Rosberg was. They're not tripping over each other so much, and they're able to maximise what they can get and win races that they aren't even supposed to be winning technically. And now a lot of that is down to Ferrari's general incompetence, but yeah, they're not winning by half a minute, but then only winning by 5-10 seconds, but they're still just winning. They're winning the key races, and Ferrari has never ever really looked like they're going to stop them over the course of an entire championship. We've not had a Ferrari driver yet in the hybrid era take it to the final round like Nico Rosberg did. And we've not had Ferrari as a constructor get Mercedes to challenge on the last race. It was lucky it went as far as Brazil last year, if you ask me. That was the closest they've come, and they still weren't anywhere near. And a lot of that was down to Kimi Räikkönen genuinely improving a lot in 2018. I mean, speaking of Mercedes as a team and the elements of their success, a big reason why is because their second driver, and I use this term loosely because Nico Rosberg was never really a quote-unquote second driver per se, but since 2014, the second highest scoring Mercedes in the championship since then. 317 in 2014, that was Rosberg. 322 the following year in 2015. When Hamilton was runner-up in 2016, he scored 380 points to Rosberg's 385. 317 from Valtteri again in his Mercedes debut year with 3 wins. And he had a slack year last year, had 247. It probably would have been nearer to 300 if it wasn't for the fact that, you know, we all know how unlucky he was at times. But let's double down here and also acknowledge the fact that, You know, Hamilton that year had 408 last year and broke the all-time points record. It was the most dominant and consistent that Lewis Hamilton has been in the hybrid era, maybe even ever as a driver. This was destruction. No Ferrari second driver in the hybrid era scored more than 251. If you take Sebastian's solid performances of the last couple of years out to one side. That was Raikkonen's 251 last year. And at this point, given that Leclerc has made a couple of errors here and there, I'm not entirely sure they're going to get up to that point again, because Mercs have already taken 99% of the possible maximum points available. They're only 3 points away from absolute perfection, and that's the 3 fastest laps they have not tried going for yet. You know, Leclerc's taken a couple of those in Bahrain and in Baku this past weekend, and Pierre Gasly had fastest lap in China. So point remains, like, Mercs are still this juggernaut. They are a true sporting dynasty at this point. They're up there with the Golden State Warriors, the New England Patriots, Manchester City as a football club, maybe the Spanish national team of like the late 2000s, early 10s, of just dominant franchises that, you know, are up there with any sporting franchise on the planet in any sport today. And that's okay. That's the whole point I want to make, is that I don't know why we seem to fail to acknowledge this sometimes. That they are a dynasty, and I don't know why Toto keeps trying to deny this fact, or try to play dumb and say, oh yeah, Ferrari's better, yada yada yada. This is a sport that's been based on dominance since its inception. And don't get me wrong, a lot of that is our own mentality as fans, where, as I've said in numerous debriefs in the past and said in other videos and on the podcast, we care most about the fleshy bit behind the wheel. We don't care so much about the team dynamic, and we don't care so much about the engineering dynamic and the technology of the cars and the resources that make them what they are. We care most about the drivers. We don't say we're Mercedes fans, we say we're Hamilton fans or Bottas fans, or that we stand for Valtteri Bottas or Sebastian Vettel, whoever your favourite driver is. We don't care so much about the teams, we care most about the drivers. That's obvious from my experience on social media and as the sport has grown and has grown its footprints on there in recent years. And that only really comes out of and comes into other play, really, when team orders comes into play. That's when the team discussion comes up. But let's not forget, and this is another key stat that King taught me a couple of years ago, and it's not changed, everything has gotten worse. 67% of the time, since 1950 when the modern championship came into play as what we now know as Formula 1, 2/3 of the time, the Constructors' Champion wins more than half the races on that calendar season. More than half. Like, and that is 2/3 of the time. It's a sport of dominance. The best team, the best resourced team, the best funded team in Formula 1 wins 95% of the time. And if it's not one, it's 1A and 1B, in those 2008, 2007 seasons when Ferrari and McLaren were virtually neck and neck, and they were wafer thin, the differences between them. Like, it's a sport of dominance. Like, competition and competitive balance in a sport like this is often rarer and the exception rather than the norm. And we should be more honest about that as fans, if you ask me. Like, that's what I see. So when I dial it back to what Toto Wolff's been saying about how Ferrari's this, Ferrari's that, we're not that great, and it goes to their drivers as well, because I know Lewis Hamilton has talked about, and Valtteri Bottas mentioned this in pre-season testing, how Ferrari were half a second faster, and it was all a catfish. You relate that now to how the 2018 season has played out. Ferrari's had the best car 1 round out of 4 so far, and that was Bahrain. Bahrain, they should have had a 1-2 finish. Instead, neither of them won, and they gave up a 1-2 to Mercedes. Valtteri was a million miles off the pace in Bahrain. All weekend, Hamilton kicked his ass and curb stomped him, and he still finished second. And now he leads the championship still. Leclerc had the mechanical problem, which is another key element in this, is the reliability. I mean, what good is your car if it's not going to work properly? And then Sebastian made a minor mistake which translated into him losing maybe 4 places due to the front wing and the vibrations he suffered when he flat spotted his car, trying to defend from Lewis Hamilton. It's not been ideal. Australia, Merck's curb stomped them. China, Mercedes was just generally better. Baku, Ferrari were in the ballpark, but every time Vettel laid an attack on Hamilton, Hamilton was able to counter and respond. It ended up being a battle between the two Mercedes for the win in the end, and Ferrari were not in play, mostly because Sebastian didn't have the pace, and the one man who might have done, Charles Leclerc, binned it on Saturday and cost himself the entire weekend. Half a second advantage, they said. Like, who are you trying to fool? I don't get it. It's like, as I said before, dominance shouldn't be a dirty word. I don't know why teams are trying so hard to hide this. I get it. You want the internet points of being the humble champions. You want to be humble. You want to keep your feet on the ground. You want to motivate your staff. You don't want to ever get complacent. I totally understand that. But don't piss on my head as a fan and call it rain and try to tell me that that Ferrari's half a second quicker right now, because it just isn't. It just isn't. It's becoming clear that Ferrari's got a very, very small sweet spot, and then the rest of the time Mercs are more versatile and they're able to win. That's how I see it anyway. And I don't get why they're trying to hide this fact or try to play it off as anything other than we're trying to be overly humble when you just come across as stupid and think we're all naive for missing that. So I don't know why teams think they're being slick so hard, especially Mercedes. I don't get why they're playing these games. Because it's the third year in a row they've played this card, and it's the third year in a row where Ferrari's been nowhere, and then we're pretending like that's the problem. At least that's where I'm sitting anyway. What do you guys think? Do you think do you think Mercs are being too slick about this? Do you think that dominance really is a dirty word and we shouldn't be mentioning it? And do you think Mercs are smoking some very good weed and have become paranoid? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your take on always, and if you've got a topic you want me to talk about on F1 or MotoGP, let me know. It may just happen. In the meantime, I've been Dre. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Sayonara.